Well, let's ask someone who is still part of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, although a peer rather than an MP. Lord David Frost, former Cabinet Office Minister, of course, and former Chief Brexit Negotiator, joins us live from Conservative Party Conference in Birmingham. Good afternoon to you, David.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's just talk briefly about the Tory leadership, contenders. I know you've been open, you're backing Robert Jenrick. I suppose his supporters have been accused of, by Kemi Badenoch and her supporters, of basically misrepresenting Kemi Badenoch in her remarks about maternity pay, which she's basically claimed that she said was excessive and excessive cost to businesses. She kept answering a question about maternity pay from Kate McCann at our sister station Times Radio, where she was given plenty of opportunities, to be fair, to clarify that she wasn't talking specifically about maternity pay, kept talking about business regulation and taxes on business and the like, and raised taxes, the state paying for everything. But do you think what Kemi Badenoch said was wrong?
Well, I've read what she said, and I do think there's a degree of ambiguity in her actual words. I do think that she is right, and all the leadership candidates are right in saying that we do need to get spending and tax down. The trouble is that picking on one individual thing will always lead you into this problems, and I think what we need is a proper strategy to bring tax and spend down in lots of areas over 5 years or so, and that's what I hope we will be working on if, as I hope, Rob Jenrick is elected next month.
But this is the same problem for the Tories and indeed for Labour, whoever's in government, is that everyone says, well, we're going to bring down taxes, but we're going to have better public services, whether or not it involves bigger or smaller state, depending on which party. But actually there isn't any money, and every time any party goes to cut a particular tax, there's a cost to that, and every time they try and cut a particular benefit, there's an outcry, whether winter fuel allowance, pensions of any sort, child benefit, any benefits out of working age, disability benefit, you name it, there's always going to be an outcry. Have governments fatally tied their own hands behind their back, of whichever party, by basically promising the earth to voters and saying, but don't worry, you won't have to pay for it?
Yeah, that's exactly what has been happening over the last decade or two. People have been saying that there is money for lots and lots of public services at a time when the economy isn't growing, and it's about time we levelled with people and said that unless we can get growth back, we're not going to be able to fund the public services that all of us want. And of course getting growth back is not going to be straightforward, but it's certainly going to involve getting tax and spending down over time, deregulating, getting rid of some of the disastrous ways we're pursuing policies like net zero, bringing industry back to the country and so on. All those things need to be done. But of course we're not in power. We need to work out a plan so that we can win an election when the time comes for proper core Conservative policies. And I'm encouraged here today that so many people are talking about those things. The mood is really quite good.
How helpful is Boris Johnson publishing his memoirs at this time, been serialised in the Mail? He's is quoting as saying that David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, threatened to F and then a word ending in K, Boris up forever if he left the government to support Brexit. He's also claimed that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, weaponised small boats crisis as a punishment beating to undermine Brexit. I mean, I have to say, that's something regarding Macron that I've been saying for quite some time. It was very clear to me that's what Emmanuel Macron was doing. It's how they dealt with us over Northern Ireland as well. It was always to make life difficult. But what do you make of those comments regarding our relationship with the EU and the role it's played within British politics in recent years?
Well, I obviously I've only read the extracts of the book. I talked to Boris at various stages in the writing process, but I've not seen what comes out. But what I've read is, it seems to me, a pretty fair depiction of how things were. we were facing punishment beatings from Europe. They didn't want us to leave. They were determined to make our lives as difficult as possible. Macron was a leader in that, and let's not forget we had to send a couple of Navy ships to Jersey to protect them against harassment from the French. So, I think this idea that everything is sweetness and light is not really true, and probably Labour are going to find that out. I think it's good that Boris has produced his book now and reminding people of some of the things we had to deal with.
Yeah, well, also reminding us, of course, about where we are where we were in terms of COVID. Interesting that he says he's now not convinced that actually lockdowns are the right thing. You famously, of course, resigned from government over lockdown policy and numerous other issues going on in government at the time, but particularly over lockdown. I know you were privately lobbying the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson for a long time to try and get us out of lockdowns, out of tier restrictions. Boris Johnson, I mean, very flowery language, typical of him, quoting, I don't know, the Greeks and the Romans, as he always does, basically sort of laughing at the tier restrictions and how insane they all were, and the medieval style lockdowns, and how he looking at the facts later around the world, seeing that you get a second wave, whether you're in China with all these restrictions or in Sweden with only voluntary restrictions. What a pity he didn't pay more attention a little bit sooner, Lord Frost?
Well, absolutely. He does say, I think, in the book, or at least in the extracts I've read, that, ultimately he takes responsibility, and he's right in that. He was the Prime Minister. He could have organised things to get better information, more understanding of trade-offs, more understanding of the costs. I think his instincts were that he wanted to do that, but there were too many people around him who didn't, and he didn't insist. I think what we're now learning shows that lockdowns were damaging, they were problematic, they were causing huge problems, and they've turned out to be a disastrous policy. So thank goodness we didn't have that last lockdown at the end of 2021, and we got out of it. But it's good to see Boris, being honest about it and thinking about it in the book.
Yeah, well, Boris being honest is always a surprise. There's a serialisation worth paying for. But here's the thing. It's fascinating, all the debates over the £22 billion black hole here and Tory austerity and all the criticisms, which a lot of them very valid, by the way, which Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have got of the former Conservative government. No one ever seems to talk about the cost of those lockdowns, the cost of paying millions of people billions of pounds to stay at home and not work, the damage to our economy long term, that let alone our healthcare, our children's education, mental health, and all of that, and societal cohesiveness, I would say, and damages to our general way of life. But there seems to be an urge in British politics, because it seems to me so many people supported those lockdowns, so many people supported that splurge of cash which we simply didn't have, that everyone's just pretending it didn't happen, whereas actually that's the main reason we are in the mess we're in today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's astonishing how little it got discussed at the general election, and I think basically, as you say, a lot of politicians don't want to face up to it, but also I think the British people just want to move on from it. They can't bear the thought that it might all have been for nothing and it was unnecessary. So I just think there's this kind of collective feeling not to look too closely. And obviously this so-called inquiry is not going to help us get to the truth in any way, it seems, unfortunately.
It certainly isn't, indeed. Let me also ask you about something I know you feel very strongly about, and that is net zero policies and the damage they will bring to any ability of us to have economic growth. Today, two big events. In Radcliffe-on-Soar, we're going to see the UK's last coal-fired plant closing. And also in Port Talbot today, the last remaining blast furnace at Tata Steel is going to stop producing steel today. It's going to be a few years before Port Talbot has the ability to produce steel from scratch. Before then, we're going to have to import it. Even then, we're not going to be able to make it actually completely from scratch. These two events happening, criticised and lots of concern raised about the high-skilled, well-paid jobs that are being lost, and that's understandable. But these two events are much more significant in that, in terms of the damage to our economy, are they not?
That's right. So I think it's very unwise to close our last coal power stations in this way. You know, obviously we don't want to use coal, but we need energy security. And, you know, Germany has turned on coal power stations in the last couple of years. And I think they're an important element of national security for us. So, and similarly with steel, the ability to produce core steel is really important. But you know, when energy prices are so high, we've got the highest industrial energy prices, electricity prices in the world nowadays. Why are people going to invest here? It's obvious that people are not going to do high energy manufacturing. It's too expensive, and that is the disastrous consequence of the net zero policy. We've got this insistence on renewables, on reducing consumption. It's a blind alley that is pushing up costs and deindustrialising this country in a way that is going to cost us a lot in years to come.
I tell you what, though, I know you're backing Robert Jenrick, who's the front runner with MPs at the moment for the Tory leadership. I'm not hearing from either him, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat or James Cleverly enough of a volte-face, a turning against the net zero policies. There's a lot of, like Rishi Sunak said, we're going to do it, but, more slowly, more sensibly. You know and I know it's not achievable, it's not affordable, it's not desirable. Why are the Tory party not making gains on this and abandoning the madness of net zero policies?
Well, I think Rob Jenrick has spoken pretty robustly about this subject. As he said there are no prizes for decarbonising in front of everybody, before everybody else. There's no need to decarbonise faster than others, and of course most of our main competitors are barely decarbonising at all. But I do think that what we're seeing is the beginning of a change here. That opinion is shifting. We are realising now we're not in government and subject to those constraints, that we can have another look at the net zero policy. I spoke on this here last night, and lots of people in the audience are very critical of net zero. So
very interesting.
I think the tide is beginning to turn.
As always, the party members ahead of the MPs, and Lord David Frost, Conservative peer, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed for that.